So I wanted to introduce our first speaker. Today's first speaker is Ryann Peyton. And Ryann serves as the director of the Colorado Attorney Mentoring Program known as CAMP, and Legal Entrepreneurs for Justice, lawyer professional development programs of the Colorado Supreme Court, a former litigator and a seasoned consultant and an advocate on professionalism, diversity, equity in the legal field. Ryann focuses their practice on civil litigation with an emphasis on LGBTQ+ families and civil rights. Please welcome Ryann.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm especially grateful today because it's dumping snow in Denver, and this is a much nicer place to be. So I am glad to be here, and I'm glad to share this talk with you this morning. A topic I think we all need to pay more attention to, but no one really has a lot of answers on how we make it any better. So we're going to have a very detailed conversation today. We're going to go through a lot of information. But my hope is by the end of this, you come out of our conversation with a little bit more hope for what we can be doing in the legal profession to improve well-being, and hopefully some practical tips and skills as well. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges in the profession that lead to well-being. Now, I'm sure everyone in the room knows this in and of itself could be a day-long presentation. All of the things that lead to negative well-being outcomes, all of the things that are keeping lawyers and legal professionals sick. But we're going to focus on the ones that I think are the biggest drivers of negative well-being in the profession. And then we're going to talk about what I argue is the way forward in this work, which is community-based approaches to well-being. Too much of our conversation in the legal profession about well-being is about self-care. I'm tired of being told if I just do more yoga and drink more water, I'll be better. So I want to talk to you about, well, how do we stop talking about well-being that way, and how do we talk about it in the framework of community care? I'm going to give you a case study of something that we're doing in Colorado. Sarah mentioned it, and I think that it's something that could be replicated really anywhere, but I'm glad to know that potentially you'll be looking at something similar here. And then we're going to talk about strategies for community-based approaches in your organizations, in the little microcosms and communities where you are in the profession. So like I said, it's a lot, but we're going to get through it, and I think it's going to be a conversation. So let's start with those well-being challenges in the legal profession. And I'm going to start with law school, not because I want to harp on law school, not because they're necessarily the entire problem. But what's interesting about going to law school is that it actually gives you brain damage. So it does. So when you go to law school, you spend 3 years in this paradigm in which you're given a lot of cautionary tales. I don't know about you, but when I was in law school, within the first several months, I learned all of the different ways that I could be fired, disbarred, grieved, lose my license, and generally fail as a human being in so many ways. And so when you get that for 3 solid years and you put yourself in this community of people who start to think with this cautionary narrative, we've become very paid worriers to a certain extent. That's intentional. We're supposed to be that way. But you can't do that without it actually having an impact on your brain. And so what recent studies, neuroimaging studies, have found is that your brain changes when you go to law school. And by the end of it, your executive functioning skills, your ability to manage the neurochemicals that show up in anxiety and in fear are diminished. And so for a lot of people who come into the legal profession, they go to law school feeling like they're one person, and they get out of law school feeling like they're somebody different. And it's not just because you've been taught how to think like a lawyer. Your brain really has changed because of the ways that we frame what lawyering looks like and how we should feel about lawyering. And so in and of itself, law school is producing legal professionals who are already more anxious and less able to deal with that anxiety. So again, we could have a whole conversation about legal education and its role in well-being, but just know that your brain has been changed. And the interesting thing about this is that it actually starts as early as studying for the LSAT. So even if you just take the LSAT and never actually go to law school, you've already given yourself a little bit of brain damage, which is just fascinating. Yeah. So So just know that. So you are a changed person by entering the legal profession and going to law school. So if we are producing new lawyers who are already struggling with anxiety and how to manage it, it's not surprising then that that just compounds and builds over the course of our legal career. So then folks get out into the legal profession and something else happens, what I call the great disconnect. And so this is, everyone comes into the profession with an idea, a vision of what it means to be a lawyer. For all of the different reasons we go to law school, we all have this idea in our head about what it's going to be like when we get out into practice. And of course, we assume that lawyering's a hard job. We're taking on responsibility for other people. We have a lot to carry as lawyers. We need to continue to educate ourselves. We need to practice the practice of law. But then there are all of these other social, cultural aspects of the legal profession that we really can't imagine when we come out into practice, and we only learn by doing. And that's what creates this disconnect, is we're actually unprepared for the realities of practice. And you see some of them listed here: unhealthy competition, the working hours. I just saw a study the other day that said that the average working day for a big law associate is 13.41 hours. And that's not, we have a big case coming up or a big deal to close. That is just an average day. No one anticipates that when they go to law school. Reduced support, this feeling of isolationism, inability to ask for help, student loans, and how to manage sort of the economic aspects of the business of law. None of that we are prepared for when we come out into practice. And so here we are, already more anxious, already kind of unable to deal with that anxiety. And then we get out into a practice, and we don't really recognize. We weren't prepared for that, and it takes a very long time to find our feet, some more than others. And ultimately, we get here, which is finding that lawyering is not only just a hard job, it's the most stressful occupation in America. And this is as of 2023. And that's not surprising. I'm sure no one in this room would say, oh, that's shocking to me. We know that it's a stressful job, but what I'm telling you is it is the most stressful job in America right now to be a lawyer. And I don't think anybody going into law school today knows this to be the case. And so it's sort of like getting hit by a train or hit by a bus when you come out into the practice. So now you're here, you're stressed out, you're anxious, and like I said, you start running into cultural aspects of the profession that are built to keep us stuck, keep us sick, keep us in the wheel. One of those is the resilience culture of our profession. And this is where I get some pushback, and I'm happy to have it. But here's my problem with resilience. We talk about it so much as like this characteristic that we want in every employee that comes in, right? We want someone who's resilient. Oops, we need somebody who has grit, all of those things. And I'm not saying that grit is a bad thing. We all need to have some grit. My problem with resilience as a cultural aspect of the legal profession is that it gives us an excuse to not talk about the systems, the structures, the cultures that require us to be resilient. If you want to be a resilient person, wonderful, good for you. But we can't use it as a way to just say, just be more resilient, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, without really talking about what's underneath. Why do we have to be so resilient in this profession? And so I think this is like a paradox that keeps us stuck in this well-being loop. We also have a hustle grind culture, not only in the legal profession, I think in general American capitalistic culture. We have this idea of productivity. We're not okay if we're not being productive. How many times do you see somebody at an event like this and you say, hey, Dave, how you doing? Oh, I'm so busy. So busy. Everybody's just, it's like a big contest about who's busier than the other. And I'm guilty of this too. When I have free time on my calendar, I get anxious. I don't know what to do with it if there's not a bunch of color-coded blocks on my calendar every day. We are used to, we have been socialized to be busy and to always be hustling and productive. And the structure of the legal profession exacerbates this. The billable hour exacerbates this in a lot of ways. But when you get into a profession that is constantly requiring you to be productive, to be hustling, to be busy, that takes its toll as well. And then, of course, we have a broad-based stigma against help seeking in the profession, right? We're supposed to come out of law school and know how to do our jobs. We're a self-regulating profession. We've decided that that's the case. We're not going to have residencies like the medical profession. We're not going to have supervision, apprenticeships like other professions do. We're supposed to be able to hit the ground running on day one. And there's a lot of stigma in a lot of legal communities about saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I've been in this profession now for 15 years and I still don't know what I'm doing half the time. And so it's really hard for folks who are trying to learn and grow in the profession to ask for help. And that's just about competency. Let's talk about the stigma of help seeking and saying, I'm not okay. That's even worse, to be able to say to a colleague, to a peer, I am not doing okay. And part of that is the way that we regulate our profession, right? We have to be competent. And if we're not okay, are we competent? So again, we could have a whole conversation about the regulatory frameworks and how those can potentially also keep us sick. But this stigma of help seeking is a cultural aspect of the profession that keeps a lot of us stuck. And so ultimately we get here, which is that lawyers are amongst the loneliest of all professionals. And what's interesting to me is I spend a lot of time in rooms like this, full of people. You're all here, you're all a part of this wonderful community, you're talking to one another. But I guarantee you, many of you in this room feel lonely, even though you're together with folks. And that's because in the profession, we talk so often about loneliness as like being isolated. And that's not necessarily the case. There are folks who loneliness is about, well, lack of connection. And the cultures of the legal profession, all of those things we've talked about thus far, put us in a position where we're not connected to one another. COVID didn't help this when we all kind of went our separate ways. As we've become more more used to working in hybrid and remote fashions, it's getting further and further apart. And so we're dealing with all of this. Many of us share in what I've talked about today, and yet nobody's talking about it and connecting with one another about it, which leads to this loneliness. I think it's a loneliness epidemic in our profession. So all of that then leads to the symptoms of negative well-being. And again, we could talk about that all day today, but I'm going to pull out the ones that I think show up the most for folks because I think they get overlooked. We have a lot of misconceptions about some of these negative well-being outcomes. We miss them. We miss them in ourselves and we miss them in each other. So I want to highlight them before we start talking about solutions, because we can't solve a problem that we are unwilling to recognize or don't recognize. So the first thing I want to talk about is burnout. And so burnout shows up for a lot of folks in a lot of different ways. But the biggest misnomer that we have about burnout in our profession is that it's for people who don't like what they do. That you can really only get burnt out if you're unhappy in your work. And the truth about burnout is that, yeah, it can show up if you're doing work you don't like. But for most people, they love what they do, and yet they still experience burnout. And why is that? Well, it's sort of a chicken and an egg. Does the legal profession create people who tend to burn out more, or does it attract people who tend to burn out more? And the answer to that is yes. Both things are true. Because burnout really is just workplace stress that we're not successfully managing. So even if you love what you do every day of your life, it's stressful. Nobody would argue that being a lawyer is easy. We're all going to have stress in the work that we do. Burnout shows up when we're not managing it well. And why don't we manage it well? Because lawyers, again, chicken or an egg, are just more likely to have the personal characteristics that lead to burnout. We're high-achieving, intense people. High-achieving, intense people burn out. They burn out because we're committed to our work. We love what we're doing. We want to serve our clients, help our communities, and we dive fully into that. And ultimately, if we don't manage the stress that comes from that very well, which our brains are already not in a great place to do because of law school and the profession itself, we struggle, we burn out. Perfectionism, so much perfectionism in our profession, that again could be its own conversation. But we struggle with the failures, the setbacks. Again, that's where this sort of resilience paradox shows up. You have a ton of perfectionistic people who are being told to be resilient, and we just get in this loop of being somewhat unable, almost paralyzed in dealing with failures and setbacks. We've already talked a little bit about excessive hours, not only that recent study that came out that looked at the length of time that people are working, but 85% of us work outside of typical work hours and work days. How many of you work weekends? Be honest. How many of you work after 5 or 6 o'clock at night? Most people, right? No shame in that, but we do it. We all do it. We're connected to our little handheld computers all the time, and so we're able to keep working forever. And those excessive hours have a toll on burnout. Boredom, I know for some younger lawyers, newer lawyers who are stuck doing document review or work that they don't necessarily love, boredom, monotony can be a big driver of burnout. We've already talked about the hustle grind culture that leads to this sort of badge of honor of busyness in our profession, and the lack of support. One thing that someone told me very early on in my career, which I really appreciated, was that you don't get any extra credit by doing it by yourself. And I think that we forget about that sometimes, that there is no magical medal or badge or bonus for doing it by yourself. It just creates burnout for you. So take that away, that you, even though you might love what you do every day, you can still burn out. And we miss this for so many people because we're looking for the ones who hate what they do and are burning out because of that. So when we start to feel burnt out, what do we have to do? We got to manage that emotion. Why? Because it doesn't feel good, and we don't want to feel burnt out. We don't want to deal with the emotions that come with being burnt out. And so what do? We start to self-medicate. And this is the next sort of well-being indicator that we see in a lot of places in the profession, when people are self-medicating, which can ultimately lead to addiction. So not only are addiction and burnout very much correlated, but the reason I bring this up is because the legal profession normalizes self-medication as a way to deal with our stress. Now, how do we do that? Well, at most, I would say, legal events, there's alcohol. The idea of, let's go get a drink, or I need a drink when this thing is over, or we're gonna celebrate this win with a drink. In Colorado, drug use is very, very high. Even, legalized drugs like marijuana in the legal profession in Colorado is something that we see a lot of folks utilizing to excess. And that's because we've normalized it. Now, I'm not saying that the answer to this is to take away alcohol from every bar association event. Somebody asked me if that's what I was proposing one time, and I felt like I was going to get attacked because we couldn't do it. I went to talk to a small law firm who said, "Well, we have a keg in our kitchen. Do we have to get rid of that?" I was like, "I don't know, but that's cool." I know there's a lot of pushback to saying, well, what do you mean get rid of alcohol? And I'm not advocating to get rid of alcohol. Everybody is their own person. We're all adults here. We all make decisions. But what I want to bring to your attention is the way that we normalize its use, right, as a way to deal with the stressors of the profession. So that correlation of, it's been a hell of a day, I need a drink. It's that kind of a thing that we want to watch out for in our community. And it's typically an indicator that there may be something around well-being happening. And so we know then, there's that correlation between burnout and addiction, and it spirals from there. Ultimately, this is where we finally start to see when people are having true well-being issues, because it comes up in discipline cases. So I think that this statistic is really interesting, that 40 to 70% of all discipline cases involve a mental health or a substance abuse issue. You can't look at that and say, oh, we don't have a problem in our profession. If we can help 40 to 70% of lawyers not be disciplined, not lose their license to practice, stay in the profession by dealing with our mental health and substance use issues in the profession, why wouldn't we do that? But by this point, it's too late. Some of these folks, we can help and put back on the right track, but for many of them, it's too late. We want to catch them early on. We want to catch them at burnout. We want to catch them at self-medication and addiction. But this is how we see it show up, two ways that most folks get in trouble from a disciplinary standpoint as a result of burnout and self-medication and addiction. One is neglect. If you're burnt out, you're going to have a hard time tracking deadlines. You're going to be avoidant of things that are going on in your client's cases because you just can't get up and deal with that person again. You can't get on the phone with that person again, whatever it may be. And then if you are self-medicating, you have an addiction problem, a substance use problem, a neglect will come by simply not being in your best state of mind and missing things that need to be missed. So we see rules 1.1 and 1.3 really coming up in a lot of these situations. And then this is the second place that we see it, client communication and confidentiality. People just start ghosting clients, stop responding to emails, phone calls, don't show up, or they're not in their right frame of mind and they share something they shouldn't and breach breach 1.6 in the client confidentiality rules. And so that's where we see most folks getting in trouble from a disciplinary standpoint. But again, by the time they're here, by the time they're in front of disciplinary counsel dealing with these issues, it's too late. And so as a community, we need to be looking for the telling behaviors that someone is dealing with burnout, someone's dealing with addiction, someone's dealing with anxiety, mental health issues. There's practice-based ones. I think most of us see these and say, oh yeah, if I saw somebody who was doing this, that would be a red flag. Or if I saw this in myself, that would be a red flag. I don't think anyone would argue about these things. We all see them and say, yeah, I think that would be someone on the road to a disciplinary issue. But this is the other place it shows up. And this is where I think we miss it the most. And this is about civility. Because when we see incivility in the legal profession, about 75% of the time, it's not just because that person's a jerk. It's not just because that person, is trying to run up a bill. It's because that person is struggling. And this is where, as a community, from a community care perspective, we're missing it. Because we tell these people, just do more yoga, maybe meditate a little bit, and that'll help your anger problems. It's not. This is where we as a community have to step in and say, something's going on for this person, how do we help? And we have normalized a lot of these behaviors in the profession as either something that is expected of lawyers to be zealous advocates, right? The client wants the shark, client wants the Rambo lawyer, or as just a badge of honor of, this is a hard job. And so, yeah, I'm gonna be withdrawn. I'm gonna be a little bit hostile. I'm gonna blame people because I'm stressed out. It's not just stress, it's something else. And so I want you to start thinking about the concept of civility is not just something we should aspire to as officers of the court and as people who are deemed protectors of the rule of law, but to see civility as something that is critical to well-being, because people who are acting in an incivil way are probably struggling with their well-being, and their behavior has an impact on others. When you are dealing with that Rambo lawyer, that shark lawyer, that bully lawyer, how do you feel? It has a ripple effect on everybody. So if we start to talk about civility through the framework of well-being, it becomes less about, well, it's my job to be a zealous advocate, and more about, this is an important way that we take care of one another in our profession. So that gets us to this part. What is community-based approaches to well-being? What does this look like? How are we already doing this, and how can we do this differently? Because like I said at the very beginning, this is my hill. I think that it really is a community-based approach we're going to have to take, which involves, one, shifting the narrative in the way that we've been talking about well-being, and two, empowering every single person in our profession to take ownership of this. It's not just for the bar presidents, it's not just for disciplinary counsel, it's not just for the judges, it's not just for the law firm leaders. Every single person, regardless of your place or stature in the legal profession, has a duty to engage in community-based approaches to well-being. So before we talk about them, I want to make one quick note. I know I've been talking now for 20 minutes or so about well-being, but I haven't really defined it for you. And I do that purposely. Well-being looks different for everybody. But the thing that I want to convey before we go any further is that well-being is not a place of arrival. We can do all of the work we need and want to do in the profession, but we will never arrive at well-being where we check the box, we are done, we have done it. Well-being exists on a continuum. And so when we're talking about community-based approaches to well-being, we're not talking about trying to get people from not being well to being well. We're trying to get people to a place where they feel supported in moving along this continuum of well-being. So each one of you today is somewhere on this continuum, from surviving to thriving. And that changes minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And so we're not getting to this magical place where we're all just thriving. We're getting to a place where we can move along this continuum with the support of our peers and our colleagues and be empowered to do that, and not just be stuck in the red and the yellow parts of this process. Okay, so with that in mind, this is where we get into the community care. I think I've made this point. Self-care is not enough because self-care puts the onus on the person to do different. And I've got to tell you, after working on well-being issues in the profession for decades now as a community, if people could just do this differently individually, they would have by now. The truth is we can't. This isn't enough to say if you want to feel better, then do differently, do better. We need to have this collective belief that we all need to do better together for the benefit of everyone else, which is a mindset change. Now, self-care is in there, right? You can't treat yourself horribly, not take care of yourself, and just expect the community to take care of you for you. It's kind of a both and, but too much of our conversation thus far as a profession has been on the self-care end of the conversation. Now, community care has two main principles to it. One is that individuals have to think about this from a community-based standpoint, that this is a collective action, and that what we do individually actually impacts the system as a whole. So this is where we come back to taking care of one another, looking for those civility indicators that I was just talking about, because when we take care of one other person, it has that ripple effect. If we can help that person in the moment as they're dealing with burnout, help them not show up and be the jerk lawyer, not bully a young associate, not tank their case for their client, then all of the ripple effect of that goes away as well. And so really seeing everybody as empowered to take part in this and to respond to individuals in a systemic way. The second aspect of community care is that we understand that certain inequities exist for different individuals in different communities. Not everyone in the profession has the same opportunity to be well. It's just a fact of the matter that inequities in our profession are tied to systemic inequities in our society, in our country, in our world. And so we have to understand that community care looks different depending on identity, depending on demographic, depending on lived experience. And so if we keep those two things in mind, then we can start to think about, well then, programmatically, practically, what does community care look like? Now, we've been doing this for a while. This is not a brand new idea. I am willing to bet that most of you have engaged in some form of community care in your organizations, in your bar associations, in your communities for a long time. This is what it looks like today in the legal profession in terms of community care approaches. Mentorship programs are a huge part of that. Mentorship programs were probably the first form of community care. We all have those, we've all seen those. Wellness committees, so many organizations, especially in larger law firms, have started these wellness committees and initiatives. Well, they may not be working, but they are a form of community care. Flexible work arrangements, before COVID happened, this wasn't really happening. And now that we have started to think about how do we bring more autonomy to the way that legal professionals work, that's a form of community care. DEI programs and committees and initiatives over the last 20, 30 years, also a form of community-based approaches. EAPs, usually in government or other places, that's a form. And then talks like this, right? Educational workshops, how do we help people to do better in the profession, CLE opportunities, that's a community-based approach. So we're doing all of these things, and yet here we are, still with the negative well-being outcomes that we have. I used to, at this point, kind of show you the data, but the data is horrible and it doesn't make anybody feel good and it's not helpful to the conversation. We're still where we were 10, 20 years ago. We haven't moved the needle on well-being, and for a lot of reasons, some of which we've talked about, stigma being the biggest one. It's really challenging for people to lean in to well-being opportunities, to well-being work in the profession. But there are some other, I think, practical reasons why these community care attempts haven't worked. One, insufficient resources, whether it's funding, whether it's human capital. For lots of reasons, we are not sufficiently resourcing people to do this work. Well-being and DEI and all of those soft skills are really typically shrugged off to the HR person or the professional development person, or you've got all the underrepresented folks that get into a committee in an organization and are supposed to solve all these problems. We don't see it as something to promote as part of true professional development. It's just a soft skill that can be placed somewhere else. In most of these programs, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. We're going to talk about in the case study of what we're doing in Colorado, how we're trying to build a program that allows people to engage with it, exactly where they are. But a one-size-fits-all approach to anything is not going to work, especially when it comes to well-being, because every single one of us needs something different to be successful. Even though these examples I gave you are community care examples, the onus is still on the individuals to do different. So when we see, especially in larger legal organizations, well-being committees, task forces formed, they talk about well-being, but again, they don't talk about it in community care. They talk about it in, well, what do we do to support our employees? And that's where you see, well, we're going to bring in a masseuse. We're going to have, these walkathons. We're going to have competitions for steps in a day. It usually ends up being kind of toxic, honestly, because it comes down to body health rather than holistic kind of mental health. And so the onus is still on the individual to do different and to change, rather than, again, looking at the systems, the structures, the culture of that organization or that community that's keeping people sick. And then at the end of the day, it's a psychological issue. We as human beings are very resistant to change. The things we really need to do in this profession to improve well-being are hard. It means disrupting the way that we've done law, the way that we've done the business of law for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that resistance to change is big, and it's a hard wall to push against to get anything significant happening. So for all of these reasons, even the best laid approaches to community care and the way we've been seeing it now for 10, 20 years simply aren't working. And so I don't think we actually need to do more. I think we're doing a lot. We just need to do it differently. And that's what I want to share with you now, is the way that we're trying to do it differently in Colorado as a potential model for you to think about in your bar association and even in your organization. So I work for the Colorado Supreme Court. I run the CAMP office, which is our attorney mentoring and professional development office. And 2 years ago, as part of our work to provide wraparound holistic services to the lawyers in Colorado, we formed what we call the Colorado Wellbeing Recognition Program for legal employers. Now, I know it's a mouthful, but it's a really important program. One of the first things that we thought about is who's actually in charge of taking care of lawyers. So we went out, we talked to the community, we talked to clients, and lo and behold, they did not care about lawyers. They were like, we don't want to take care of you. That's not for us. We don't care if you're burnt out. We don't care if you're stressed. Just can you show up and do the job? And so we got to this question of, well, if we don't take care of ourselves, who's going to do it? And the answer is nobody else is going to do it. So really our mission is to support legal organizations as a whole, and that's everyone from solo small firm practitioners all the way up to international law firms, in changing the systems, structures, and cultures of their organizations and of the legal profession as a whole that are keeping people sick. We don't want to have the conversation anymore about self-care. We want to talk about community care, and we want to flip the script and put the onus on the leaders of the profession, the people who have power. Because who creates the systems, structures, and cultures in our profession? The people at the top, the judges, the law firm leaders, the regulatory bodies. The people who employ lawyers are the ones who have the power to create systems and structures and cultures to either keep them sick or to keep them well. And so we're trying to approach it from that top-down mentality in the hopes that focusing on those systems and structures, we can actually move the needle. Now, one of the questions I get is, well, do you have a LAP program in Colorado, a lawyer assistance program? And why doesn't this program live with them? Why does it live in your office? And yes, we have a wonderful LAP program in our state, but it was intentionally placed with my office, which is a professional development office, because the LAP program deals with behavioral health. They're responsive to people who are in crisis. They're responsive to people who are not well. We are responsible for teaching lawyers how to be better lawyers and how to be better people. And that's what this program is about. It's not a behavioral health program. It's about teaching lawyers how to be better lawyers through a professional development lens. And so that's why it lives with my office. And that's the kind of approach that we take to this. Well-being as a professional development imperative in Colorado. So quick timeline, you can see even though we're 2 years into the program, it actually started pre-COVID in 2018. Our state Supreme Court created a well-being task force, brought together a number of stakeholders to ask the question, how do we solve this problem, right? Really easy question to answer. So we started working on it. And it was interesting, the conversations that were happening pre-COVID was almost, sort of projecting where we were going as a nation. Because when COVID hit in 2020, we were already ahead of the game, having had some of the conversations of how do we take care of each other and keep people well. So this idea came up to create a program that looked like this. And this program really came out of the idea of, well, if we want to get legal employers and people in power to pay attention to this problem, we have to tie it to money. And so we started to think about how do we show legal employers the business case for well-being. And this is where this idea came from, is really getting employers on board to understand that the impacts of well-being, negative well-being, have an impact on the bottom line of every legal organization. So if you are responsible for leading, managing, dealing with the bottom line of a legal organization, you should care about this. Because when people are sick, when people are burnt out, when people leave the profession, it costs money in a lot of different ways. And so we thought, well, could we take a business case and turn it into a professional development program? So what we did, we ran a pilot in the middle of COVID in 2020 of this program. We brought in a diverse set of legal employers, ran them through, at the time, what was sort of the skeleton of the program, and they loved it. Not only did they say, this is what we've been missing, but this helped. In the middle of a pandemic, this helped. This is what we needed to keep people employed, to keep people engaged, and to keep people well in our organization. So we spent the next year after the pilot really building out the program, developing it into what it is today. We had our first year last year in 2023, and we're just wrapping up now our second year in the program. And I'll tell you about our 2023 statistics and things like that. But the program has 3 components. It starts with a pledge to lawyer well-being. How many people have taken the ABA pledge to lawyer well-being? Yeah, that's what I thought. So the ABA, did you know, has a pledge to lawyer well-being. They've had one since 2016. Nobody knows about it, and nobody cares about it because it's not very helpful. So we in Colorado built our own pledge. We actually have 2 pledges. We have one for legal employers who have multiple employees, and we have one for solo practitioners. One of the things that came out of the pilot program that we were surprised by was the number of solo practitioners who wanted to be a part of this program because they fundamentally understand the connection between their own well-being and the business case, the bottom line. Because if they can't work, if they're not at their best, their entire business suffers. But we knew that what a pledge to well-being looked like for a solo practitioner is very different than what it looks like for a law firm of 500 attorneys or a legal organization of 500 attorneys. So we have 2 pledges, and I'll walk through those pledges in a minute. But ultimately, this is the way that people enter the program. They raise their hand and they say, we're going to participate because we're taking the pledge. And the pledge is not meant to be a stick. It's really meant to give people a starting place for how to approach this in their organization. Give them ideas, give them scaffolding, give them guardrails, give them a pathway, so that they're not having to come up with, well, we really believe in this, we want to do this, but how? So the pledge is there to help them do that and to build year over year in the work that they're doing. Now, the pledge encompasses the 6 goal areas that we have for our program. So we went to the research, we went to the experts, and we looked at what are the places in the profession from a systemic, structural, and cultural level that keep people sick, and where do the people with power in the profession have the ability to make changes. And so we identified 6 areas where people can lean in to their organization at those levels to make changes to keep people well. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then at the end of the program, our Supreme Court recognizes those participants for their participation in the program, and I'll explain what that looks like as well. So here are the 6 goal areas. I know it might be a little hard to see from the back, but really, again, we looked at the research and said, where are the places that we're creating these negative well-being outcomes? Where can people who have power move the needle? This is what we came up with. One is around culture in an organization. Easy, right? Let's just change culture, but really getting leadership bought in and accountable for well-being. Not allowing leadership to say, again, that's on you. If you're not doing well, go to your LAP program, go get help, have a therapist. Putting the onus and the accountability on leaders in organizations to make well-being an imperative. Fostering competence, making sure that people have the professional development and the competency they need to be successful. What the research tells us is that when people don't know what they're doing, when people feel like if they screw up just once, they're gonna get fired, they're gonna lose their whole lives, they're gonna lose their license, is not helpful to keeping people well and for people to do their best work. So how do we make sure that we are creating cultures of competency in legal organizations through mentoring and professional development? Work-life integration, autonomy, giving people autonomy to work in the ways that work for them. Now, of course, we came up with that before COVID happened, at a time when the legal profession did not know what work from home looked like. It wasn't a thing in our profession. Now it is. So surprisingly, that's been the easiest for most organizations to take on. Promoting diversity, equity, and belonging as a culture in organizations, knowing that when people don't feel like they belong at work or in a particular community or organization, they will not be well. So how do we do that better? This one, compensation metrics, was a surprise from the research, but when you think about it, it's not surprising at all. But it's also the place that is hardest for our participants to lean into. And that is looking at the business of law, how we compensate people, how we reward people, how we define success, and thinking about the ways in which that keeps people sick. We even have, and you'll see in a minute, a recommendation to get rid of the billable hour in certain areas, which is that's almost as bad as telling people to get the keg out of their law firm kitchen. How can we do that? But compensation and the way that we engage in the business of law is a huge driver of well-being. And then finally, how do we actually measure what we're doing? We don't want our work and well-being to suffer from what the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion work suffered from for so many decades, which is let's just do these things on the surface level and it'll be fine. No, we're gonna look, we're gonna measure, make sure what we're doing is working. So these are the goal areas that we have. And each goal area is structured to provide the participants in the program with actual practical things that they can do in their organization. So we give them the research, why is this important? And then we give them ideas on what they can do. And those ideas are designed on a spectrum from really easy, low-hanging fruit you could do tomorrow without a lot of time, energy, or resources, all the way up to disruptive of the legal profession. And the idea is, one, you let people jump in where it makes the most sense for their organization. Some folks are real beginners in this work. And so they need something they need a win, a really easy win in well-being. We give them that. There are some folks who have already been doing this and need something more challenging. And there are some folks who are we're gonna disrupt everything. So give me the hardest things to do. But it allows organizations and leaders to engage in a way that works for them. It's not one size fits all. But we want them to build. We don't want this just to be a one-year program. We want them to come back every year and say, okay, last year we got an easy win with this. Now we're gonna challenge ourselves a little bit more with that and build on it. I know this is small. You have the slide decks. All of this also is on our website, which I'll give you at the end, so you can go and see this. But this is an example of, in the compensation area, where things are sort of how they're ranked. So you can see the challenge level of easy all the way up to challenging for compensation. So easy, provide equal access to rainmaking skills to everybody. That's not so hard. Teach people how to develop business. Challenging, multi-factor compensation structures. A lot harder for a lot of places. And then everything in between. So this is how all of the goals are framed, to have this spectrum of action. And we have people that not only do these things, but that these become a jumping off point for something different that's important to their organization, that's unique to their organization. But it gives them enough to get going without forcing them into a box that doesn't work for them, but to give them a place to move forward from there. So that's what the goal areas look like. And those then all get incorporated into our pledge, like I said. And so people take the pledge every year. They say, we're going to do X, Y, Z. And that's their way of engaging with the program. And it gives them that roadmap for them to do year over year. So let me share some of the pledge examples for you and how we take the goal areas and put them into the pledge. So here's a pledge example for fostering competence. So educational opportunities during work hours on well-being and behavioral health through partnerships with our LAP program, with my office, with our disciplinary office. So this is an example, and someone can check this box and say, yeah, we're going to do that this year, or something like that in our organization. Here's one around work-life integration, flexible schedules. So some examples: what's a remote work or work from home policy? How are we talking about neurodivergent working styles in the way that we're creating remote work policies? What are the team building opportunities for hybrid employees? So again, giving them something to do and examples of what that can look like. Here's one on compensation metrics. So you can see here, pay equity analysis, pay equity audit, update hiring policy and practices, equal access to mentoring and leadership, and then financial security. We've talked a lot about the need for organizational leaders to make sure that people have financial security, so pay them what they are worth, and make sure that they have the resources to know what to do to keep themselves financially secure as well, provide them with training. So there's some examples there. And then a culture of well-being. This is where we de-emphasize the status quo of drinking, having a newsletter, offering trainings to managers on how to create culture change. Because so often in the profession, the leaders of the profession just were here long enough or brought in enough business. They didn't really get training on how to be effective managers or effective leaders. So these are all in the pledge, and people opt in and opt out to what works for them for that given year. And again, it's not a stick. You must do it this way. This is what you want to do this year, great. And you take it back to your organization, and that's where the well-being committees then have action to take. Here's our roadmap. Here's what this is going to look like for our organization. So in addition then to the pledge and the goal areas and all of these examples, we provide them with a ton of resources throughout the year. CLE events, mentoring opportunities. We do quarterly lunch and learns. And we have thousands of attorneys join us in those, even folks who aren't participating in the pledge. They come and listen to what we're talking about. And then we put on an all-day symposium every September, a conference like this, where we have speakers from across the country coming in to talk about well-being. It's a wonderful peer-to-peer networking opportunity for folks, but people really enjoy the education and the collaborative aspect of this because we don't want people to be siloed. We know there's much to share and learn from one another, so we create that space as well. We go. And then we also have a leadership cohort. So this is a small group of leaders in the profession who are coming together to take a deeper dive through a 6-module curriculum over the course of half of a year. We meet monthly. We have facilitators. We work together. People bring, here's what's going well in my organization. Here's where I'm struggling. And they're able to essentially be certified as well-being leaders in their organization and in the profession overall. At the end of the year, I talked about the recognition. Our Supreme Court wants the lawyers and the legal organizations who take part in this to be recognized. And so we do 2 things. One, we provide something physical. So everybody gets a virtual badge. You can see some examples on the top. This has actually become a commodity in Colorado. People want these in their email signatures. They want these on their website because what it tells employee or potential employees is we care about this and we're doing the work. And so these badges have become that commodity. And then we provide them an opportunity to have an event like this with our Supreme Court. So this is a photo of a couple of the folks from last year. We had 5 of our 7 justices attend that event. Our Chief Justice there in the middle, Monica Marquez, was there to thank individually every single person who participates in this, because we want those legal leaders to know change comes from the top, and our Supreme Court is behind us 110%. Couple of data points from last year. Like I said, we're wrapping up this year, so I don't have this year's data, but in our inaugural year, at a 4.8 out of 5 rating from people who participated, We had 50 legal organizations participate and over 1,000 participants in all of our educational events. You can see some of the topics that we focused on last year and this year in terms of the lunch and learns and the symposium. Again, it's all on our website, and you can see all of that. We for this year, we are up 18% in participation, and 100% of the people who participated last year have come back this year. We didn't lose anybody, which is pretty amazing. And we've had almost double the participation in our educational events. So at least in Colorado, this is something people are hungry for and want to be a part of. There's other data that we've been collecting, from the pledge, then what did people actually do? How did that show up? And we're organizing that to put into a report that we'll be able to share at the end of the year. So that's a model. You can take it, you can leave it, but it's something that you can do in your organization, in your profession. Everything that we offer is on our website. There's no paywall. Take it. If something here has resonated for you to take back to your organization, you want to use the pledge, you want to use the goal areas to help drive these conversations in your organization, grab it, take it, do with it what you will, because it's there. We don't want people to recreate the wheel. And if you have feedback on it, let us know, because again, we're trying to create a national model for folks. All right, real quick to wrap up, if that model isn't for you, or you're not sure you want to do something quite as structured, let me leave you with a couple of approaches for creating community care in your organization or in your community. And there's really three characteristics, I guess, to creating that culture of community care: building a supportive culture, encouraging participation, and measuring success. All three of these need to be present in order for a community care initiative to go well. So what do we mean? Building a supportive culture. This isn't rocket science, but it's really, really hard to do. So one, we need that commitment from leadership. It has got to start from the top. If leaders are not invested, are not accountable for this work, it can only go so far. And so leaders need to be providing visible support, engaging with it themselves. Actions speak way louder than words. We don't need another statement on your website. We don't need another memo to employees. We need you to show up and do it with everybody else. Having a strategy. I am a systems thinker. I don't believe in, if you don't have a goal, if you don't have a strategy, you're never going to get anywhere. So what is the strategy? It doesn't have to be a 30-page thesis. It doesn't have to be a articulated strategic plan, but you've got to have a strategy for how you're going to approach this in your organization. So one thing that you want to do first is figure out what the needs are. Regardless of the size of your organization, ask people how they're doing. What are the pain points for them? But think about it from a systems and a structures level. So looking at policies, looking at the systems in your organization, looking at practices. Where are the places that people are getting stuck and getting sick? Those are a great place to start building out goals around improving. And so having clear goals and clear strategies for addressing what needs to be addressed. We can't solve problems we don't know and we don't understand. So identify those problems. And I know lawyers are like, I can't identify the problems, right? Because then I'm on notice. But then you can't actually do anything if you don't know what you're trying to solve. So take the risk of asking the questions. And then most importantly is psychological safety, making sure that people feel like they can be psychologically safe in your organization. So transparency in what you're doing and how decisions are made, feedback mechanisms, do you have those? What do they look like? And are the values of your organization aligned? Is what you say, who you are and what you want to do as an organization aligning with what that looks like in practical everyday, what it is to be in that organization. So spending a lot of time in building that supportive culture is a huge driver of community care. But then you've got to get people to participate, right, in what you're building. And that is hard work too. You can't just necessarily build it and they will come. You want to think about participation strategically, again, looking at your goals and your strategy. So not a one-size-fits-all approach. Whatever you do has to be something that people can opt into in a way that works for them. Meet people where they are. So get that employee input on what people want. Don't waste your time and spin your wheels building a program no one's going to participate in because you didn't ask the question of what did they need and want in the first place. Integrate whatever your well-being initiative and action is, integrate that into the community care practices you're already doing, whether it's mentoring, whether it's DE&I, whether it's community events, social events. You're already doing community care, so integrate, weave in your well-being work into that, and then remove barriers to engagement. We don't think about that very often, but if I have to give up billable hours to go participate in this well-being thing, I'm not going to do it. If I get pinged for billable hours, I'm not going to do it. If I have to do it in the evenings and the weekends, I'm not going to do it. And then be very careful with incentives. I'm all for, yes, we should be getting more steps, but when we start to incentivize people, especially around physical health and body image issues, it can actually be toxic. And especially when we incentivize with money, it can cause people to take risks and do worse harm to themselves in an effort to gain the money from being a part of that. So be careful with incentives. And then finally, measure success. Again, very hard to do, but so important. We don't want to build something that just sits on a shelf. And so what we're looking at here is tracking employee feedback and satisfaction, but also track participation and engagement in terms of who's showing up. Are we seeing growth here? And again, that comes back to your goals. What did you want? What were you trying to build in the first place? But people always ask me, well, what are we supposed to measure? Should we just measure, output and productivity? No, this is not what we're talking about. We're not saying build a program where you can get people to work more. We're saying let's build a program to get people to work better. So we're looking at quality of work, teamwork. Is there infighting? Are people feeling better about their relationships with their coworkers? Are clients happier? All of those things. So looking at performance data not through a productivity lens, but really through a sense of belonging and quality lens at the end of the day. And then retention rates. Are people staying in your organization? That's a big indicator of whether or not you've got a good well-being initiative going for you. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I'm happy to stick around for questions. Here's the website, coloradolawyerwellbeing.org. Go there. Everything I've mentioned is there. And if you need something, want something that you don't see, email me, call me, and I'll get it for you if we have it. And if I don't, I'll give you any information that I have. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you'll take some of this back to your organization. Thanks for having me, and all my best for the rest of the day.